clause A, the problem. Form a new union territory, we will not read it as state. Form a new union territory, singular will include a plural. So form more than one union territory, no problem. Form a new union territory by doing what?
By separation of territory from any state. Territory means geographical area.
Right. So from the state of J&K, you carve out a territory and form, say, a union territory of Ladakh.
Jammu-Kashmir and Ladakh. But I don't want to pitch that high. But otherwise, it would not prohibit even a state being made union territory. But that's not the question we are dealing with, Manoj.
So the first part of clause A, in other words, according to you, form a new union territory by separation of territory from any state.
And
contemplate a situation where you have a larger state and you contemplate the creation of a union territory by separating out a territory. In this case, you separated out a territory to form the union territory of Ladakh, and then the remaining you carved out and said this will be the union territory of...
It will not amount to reading. Suppose you had not carved out Ladakh and you had declared the whole thing as a UT.
Look, there is no restriction in doing that. I don't wish to pitch it that high.
I'm going to test and understand. Suppose you create one UT only. Then it is form a new state by separation of territory from any state. That has not occurred. No UT has been carved out. Or by uniting two or more states or part of the state, or by uniting any of the territory into part of the state. How will it apply? Suppose you had not carved out Ladakh.
Possibly.
Whole state. So then the power would be the conversion of any state into a UT.
That possibly
the fact that you carve out a part of a state.
Possibly, your lordships are right. That is not
higher.
That is possibly not contemplated, subject to. But form a new state, that is form a new union territory.
That's the proposition.
By separation of territory from any state. So separation is necessary.
So if you don't separate and create, you really, how do you contemplate converting a state into UT? And if, I'm just saying for the sake of argument, if that is not possible, can you do that by carving out a UT and making the other also UT?
There is no restrictions. And this is how, my lord, it is understood by your lordships also. Because, for example, my lord, Assam, Tripura and Arunachal became UT first and thereafter became state. Assam remained a state, that's the distinction. But Assam could have also become a UT. There is no restriction.
That's what I'm saying. See, just carving out Ladakh as a UT is, I would say, less complicated in its nature. So therefore, to test the proposition, I am saying, suppose you don't carve out UT, Ladakh. You decide that the whole state should be a UT. So can you do that and say J&K state will remain as it is as boundary, but from state it becomes a UT? When we want it, we'll reconvert it back to the state.
My lord, my first reading is separation is necessary. That's my first reading.
That is what is a little...
Because that question we are not faced, my lord, right now in this.
So the question will arise to test it that if you cannot convert a state into a UT, then can you carve out a UT? That's fine. But in the bargain also say that what I could not do without carving out a UT, I can do it now by making both of them the UT.
No, because I had a separate reason to carve out Ladakh as a separate UT.
You may. No difficulty. That's your decision. That's why I'm saying that's less complicated by its nature. Carving out a UT.
Here it's less complicated.
Reducing both parts of the carved out and the pre-carved out. So suppose Assam you carved out a UT. But you say no, we carve out a portion of the Assam as UT and also convert Assam into a UT. That's the testing proposition.
It would be an extreme example, but for the purpose of testing, there can be two answers. A, separation would be necessary, and if separation takes place, that doesn't take place if one state is declared UT. So one state cannot be declared.
What is troubling me? Whether
your lordships are right. One state possibly, under 3 cannot be declared as UT, but Here, it is nobody's case that we declared Ladakh as UT to come out of this embargo. It's nobody's case. We had separate reasons.
Mr. Solicitor, there may be another way of looking at it. Apropos the theme with which you began, which is the general situation in Jammu and Kashmir. As we see, the creation of union territories post-independence, you have on the one hand examples like Chandigarh, which was carved out during the Punjab Reorganization Act and remained a union territory. It is a permanent union territory.
It was a part of state.
It was a part of a state and became a union territory to be the common capital for two sister states. That one. Then you have a progression where certain areas of existing states became union territories in the progression of making them states. That's the Northeast. For instance, you have Mizoram, you have Manipur, you have Tripura. They were part of states. They become union territories, but that's in the process of making them into a stable administration to become states. You can't immediately make them states. Parliament can certainly make that. Today, the situation is not right to make them full-fledged states. Today, we will carve them out, give them the status of a union territory at a future point of time when Parliament feels that, well, they now are sufficiently stable institutionally, we will make them as states, which we did in the Northeast. To put something, perhaps you may look at what we are trying to suggest. Why is it not possible for the union to say that, well, right now, say in a case of a particular state, we have such an extreme situation in terms of national security, in terms of, other...
We want direct control.
That we want for a certain stipulated period that a union territory should be created. But this creation of a union territory is not a feature of permanence. But this shall then again progress back to its position of a state.
Removing the reasons why it was required to be
Should
converted.
the union not have a control for a certain stipulated period to bring stability? Because ultimately, let's face it, whether it's a state, whether it's a union territory, all of us have survived, the nation survives.
Yes.
Right?
Doubtlessly.
If the nation itself doesn't survive, there's no question, there's no relevance of states or union territories. So is it not should we not give that allowance to Parliament to sort of postulate that for a certain period, in the interest of the preservation of the nation itself, in the interest of the preservation of the union itself, we want for a certain stipulated period that this particular state should go into the fold of union territory on the clear understanding that this shall revert to a position of a state over a period of time. You can't lay down that period in a given case. In a given case, it may be 6 months. In a given case, it may be 1 year. But that progression, I think the government has to also make a statement before us.
Look,
that progression back to a state has to take place. It can't be a union territory in permanence.
I'm grateful, my lord. That's exactly, I'll read, my lord, after the lunch. That's exactly the statement made on the floor of the House. I'll read, my lord, that statement. That this is not a permanent feature. After the situation returns to normalcy, we want it to become a state again. I'll read, my lord, that statement.
And then after lunch, we would also have we don't want to bind you down to because we are conscious of the fact that these are matters of national security. We understand that, ultimately the preservation of the nation itself is the overriding concern. But without putting you in a sense of a bind, both you and attorney may seek instructions at the highest level. Is there some time frame in view?
No, time frame. I'll take instructions once followed from your lordships, but I'll show the statement made on the floor and the efforts made. And the statement is, once the efforts are fruitful and everything is normal, then, my lord, there is a. But I'll
equally, Mr. Solicitor and Mr. Attorney, restoration of democracy is a very important.
Absolutely,
it's a vital component for our nation.
In 2020,
have a situation where you have.
My lord, only one thing, my lord, give me a second more. In 2020, for the first time in the history, the local government elections took place. 34,000 people are now elected people, which is possible only because of.
Therefore, the progression, we take your point. We take your point that the progression has already begun.
Yes, madam. No hartal, no stone pelting, no curfew.
That means situation is normal, madam.
But
no, I am not only on, my lord, election and politics. I am on, my lord, national integrity.
Is there a roadmap?
Yes, it is.
And tell us what the roadmap is.